Wyatt Cole pulled that letter from his pocket and pressed it flat against the empty platform, Emily's handwriting staring up at a sky she never arrived under. Behind him, Hank Gruber laughed loud enough for the whole street to hear. Stood up by a mail-order bride. Can't say we didn't warn you. Cole Wyatt turned slowly. Say that again, he said. Hank stepped forward and knocked the letter from his hand deliberately, letting it fall into the dirt. She ain't coming. Wyatt looked down at Emily's words face down in the dust. Something cold moved through him, not anger, certainty. She had promised, and Emily Harper did not strike him as a woman who broke promises. Something had stopped her. If this story already has you holding your breath, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit that bell and drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far Emily's story has traveled. Every single city you leave tells me you're still with me, and I write every word for you. The summer of 1886 arrived in Cutter's Creek, Wyoming. The way it always did, without asking permission and without apology. The sun hammered the earth flat. The dry grass along the ridge turned the color of old bone. The creek that gave the town its name ran shallow and slow, and the cottonwood trees stood perfectly still because there was no wind worth mentioning for 3 weeks running. Wyatt Cole had lived through 11 Wyoming summers, and he had never once cared what month it was. Time moved differently on a ranch. You measured it in fence posts that needed replacing, in calves born wrong, in wells that ran dry, in the particular ache in your back that told you whether it was going to rain. He had built his life around that kind of calendar, practical, predictable, merciless. But this summer was different. This summer, Wyatt Cole was waiting for something. He stood on the platform of the Cutter's Creek train station, wearing his good black coat over a white linen shirt he had ordered special from a catalog out of Denver. He had polished his boots the night before until he could see his own reflection in them. And the sight of his own face, staring back at him from the leather, had startled him. He looked younger than he remembered. Hopeful in a way he had almost forgotten how to be. In his left hand, folded into a careful square, was a letter. He had read it so many times the paper had gone soft at the creases. Dear Wyatt. It began in handwriting that slanted slightly to the right, as though the words themselves were leaning toward him across the distance. I have arranged everything. Mrs. Calvert is taking my furniture. The Reverend has my forwarding address. I have settled what debts I could and let go of what I could not carry. I will be on the Thursday train, the 6th of June. I will be wearing my green dress, the one I told you about. I want you to know that I am not frightened. I am ready. I have been ready for longer than I knew. Emily, he had received that letter 11 days ago. He had read it 11 times the day it arrived, and once every morning since, standing at his kitchen table with his coffee going cold beside him. The Thursday train came in at 4:30 in the afternoon. Wyatt had arrived at the station at 3 o'clock. He told himself it was practical. He wanted to make sure he had time to load her trunk, to find a good spot for her to sit on the wagon, to be sure the horses were calm before he introduced her to them. Emily Harper had grown up in a city. She had never been on a ranch in her life. He didn't want to overwhelm her. Those were the reasons, he told himself. The real reason was simpler. He had been so afraid she wouldn't come that he had needed 2 extra hours just to practice standing still. The station master, a round-bellied man named Gerald Holt, had given Wyatt a knowing look when he arrived. Miss Harper's train, Gerald said. Not unkindly. Gerald had nodded and gone back inside, and Wyatt had taken his position at the edge of the platform and waited. He was not a man who struggled with waiting. He had waited out 3-day blizzards in a cabin no bigger than a horse stall. He had waded through a cattle fever that took 19 of his 32 head in a single bad week. He had waited for a letter from his brother in Missouri that he was now fairly certain would never arrive. Wyatt Cole knew how to be still and how to endure. But the minutes between 3 o'clock and 4:30 had stretched in a way he hadn't experienced before, not like endurance, but like anticipation, and the difference between those two things, he realized, was enormous. The train arrived 7 minutes late. Wyatt's hands tightened around the letter. He watched the passengers come off the cars one by one. A family with 3 children, the youngest of whom was asleep on the father's shoulder. 2 men in business suits carrying leather briefcases. A woman in her 60s with a bird cage. A young couple who stepped onto the platform and immediately reached for each other's hands. A drummer with sample cases and a harassed expression. A rancher Wyatt recognized from 2 counties over. A boy of about 16 traveling alone with a new hat and an old rifle. He watched every door, he watched every face. The station master called out the stops ahead Laramie, Rollins, Rock Springs, and the train began to breathe again. That deep mechanical exhale that meant it was about to move. Wyatt stepped forward. "Gerald," he said, and his voice came out steadier than he felt. "Is there another car in the back?" Gerald Holt stepped out of the station doorway, shielding his eyes from the sun, and looked down the platform. "That's all of them, Wyatt. She's ready to roll. There might be a woman green dress, she might have been delayed boarding. I pulled the manifest myself this morning." Gerald's voice was not unkind, but it was certain. "Wasn't a Miss Harper on it. I'm sorry." "Son." The train moved. Wyatt stood on the platform and watched it go. He stood there for a long time after the sound of it had faded, after the smoke had thinned and disappeared, after the last vibration had died out of the rails, after Gerald Holt had gone back inside and closed the door behind him. He stood on that empty platform in his good black coat, with Emily's letter folded in his hand. And he felt something in the center of his chest that he did not have a clean name for. It wasn't quite heartbreak. He'd had that before years ago. And it had felt like a door slamming. This felt more like a door left open. A screen door, swinging in the wind, banging softly against the frame, not final. Not closed, but wrong complete. He walked back to his wagon. He untied the horses. He sat on the bench and he held the reins without moving for a good 5 minutes, staring at the empty street in front of him. Then Hank Gruber appeared. Hank Gruber owned the feed store on Main and had opinions about everything in Cutter's Creek and the surrounding 40 miles. He was not a cruel man, exactly just the kind of man who confused honesty with permission. "I heard the train was light today," Hank said, settling his weight against the hitching post, with his thumbs hooked in his suspenders. "Your mail-order bride didn't show?" Wyatt looked at him. "I expect she had her reasons," Wyatt said. "I expect she took one look at the situation and thought better of it." Hank smiled like a man who had been right about something for a long time. "Now don't take it personal, Wyatt. A woman from back east, coming all the way out here to a ranch in Wyoming? You got to admit that was always a long shot. A real long shot." "I'm going to ask you to move away from my horses," Wyatt said quietly. Hank raised his hands and stepped back, still smiling. "Just saying what folks are thinking. Then folks ought to think about something else." He drove home. The ranch was 8 miles from town, along a road that was 2 packed-down ruts with grass growing up the middle. He knew every rock and dip of it. His horses knew it well enough to walk it in the dark. He had driven this road in every condition Wyoming could invent: mud so deep the wheels sank to the axle, ice so hard the horse's shoes struck sparks, dust so thick he had to wrap a bandana over his face to breathe. Tonight it was just dry and straight and very quiet, and the silence felt different than it usually did. He pulled up in front of the house and sat on the wagon bench a moment before he got down. The house was a good house, not large but solid. He had built the south wall himself after a winter storm took it down 3 years ago. He had put in a proper window on the east side so the morning light would come through. He had built a second chair for the kitchen table. He looked at that second chair now, through the open door, with the evening light coming in sideways and landing on the empty seat. Then he unhitched the horses, saw to their water and grain, and went inside. He did not eat supper. He sat at the kitchen table with Emily's letter in front of him and a lamp burning low, and he read it again. I want you to know that I am not frightened. I am ready. People did not write things like that if they intended to disappear. He had corresponded with Emily Harper for 4 months careful. Searching letters on both sides, the kind where you choose every word deliberately, because you know you are revealing something true about yourself. He knew her handwriting. He knew the particular way she constructed a sentence when she was being careful about something, and the looser, faster way she wrote when she was carried away by what she was saying. She had not written like a woman who was having second thoughts. She had written like a woman who was counting the days. He folded the letter and put it in his shirt pocket. The next morning he rode to town. He did not go to the saloon or the feed store or anywhere a man goes when he is looking for sympathy. He went to the telegraph office, where a young man named Clarence Finch sat behind the counter trying to look busy. I need to send a wire, Wyatt said, to Omaha, to a reverend by the name of Samuel Beckett. He can be reached through the First Methodist Church on Douglas Street. Clarence wrote it down. What's the message? Miss Emily Harper was to travel from Omaha to Cutter's Creek on the 6th of June. She did not arrive. I am inquiring as to whether she departed as planned and whether anyone in Omaha has knowledge of her whereabouts. Clarence looked up. That's a long one. Charge me for it, Wyatt said. He waited 2 hours for the reply. He sat on the bench outside the telegraph office with his hat in his hands and watched the street. 2 women from the ladies' auxiliary passed by and gave him looks that mixed pity with a certain relish the Lippel gave when they had predicted a disaster and turned out to be right. He kept his eyes on the street and didn't acknowledge them. Clarence came out at 10:30 with the reply in his hand. From Reverend Beckett, he said, and handed it over. Wyatt read it standing up. Miss Harper departed Omaha June 5th as planned. Traveled with wagon hired from Maury Transport, chose overland route rather than full rail on account of cost. Last seen at Junction Station June 6th morning. Have had no word since. Deeply concerned. Please advise if she arrives. Wyatt read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in the same pocket as Emily's letter. Overland route. She hadn't taken the train the whole way. She'd hired a wagon from some outfit he'd never heard of. And she'd been cutting across country, probably through the mountain passes south of Laramie. The ones that saved 3 days of travel time if the weather was decent, and cost you everything if it wasn't. And nobody had seen her in 4 days. He walked back into the telegraph office. Send another wire, he said, to Junction Station. Ask the station master if he had contact with a hired wagon from Maury Transport, carrying a woman named Emily Harper on June 6th. Clarence wrote it down without comment. The reply came back in 40 minutes. Wagon departed Junction Station June 6th midday. Driver gave name of Dooley. Wagon last seen heading northwest on Mountain Road. Road through Saddleback Pass reported rough after recent rains. Have had no further contact with said party. Wyatt stood at the counter and looked at that paper for a long moment. Saddleback Pass. After recent rains, he knew Saddleback Pass. He had ridden through it once, in better weather than Emily had traveled. And he had not liked it. The road dropped sharply on the western side. And when the ground was wet, the clay turned treacherous, slick, and deep and unpredictable. A loaded wagon on that downgrade, with a driver who didn't know the terrain and horses that were nervous. He stopped that line of thought. Thank you, Clarence, he said, and walked out. He went directly to the livery, where his horse, a big dark bay gelding named Decker, was watching him from the stall, with the expression of a horse who had been expecting this. I know, Wyatt said, and saddled him. He stopped at the mercantile for supplies: jerky, hardtack, rope, a medical kit that he packed with considerably more care than he usually would. The woman behind the counter, Mrs. Aldine Pryor, watched him with sharp eyes. You're going looking for her, Mrs. Pryor said. It was not a question. Yes, ma'am. Saddleback Road? That's my thinking. She didn't say anything for a moment. She was a practical woman of 62 who had been widowed for 9 years and had survived that particular circumstance by being organized about everything and sentimental about almost nothing. But she had known Wyatt Cole since he had first come to Cutter's Creek with nothing but a horse and a land deed and a look in his eyes that said he intended to stay. She added a second roll of bandaging to the pile without being asked. "You take care out there," she said. "Yes, ma'am, I plan to." He rode out of Cutter's Creek at 11 in the morning, heading south toward the mountains, and he did not look back. The first day was straightforward. He knew the land between the ranch and the foothills well enough, had worked cattle over most of it at one time or another. Knew where the ground was soft and where it held, knew the creek crossings and the ridge lines. He made good time. At dusk, he found shelter in the lee of a rock face and made a small fire. He ate without tasting the food and tried not to think too much. Thinking too much on a search like this was a particular kind of enemy. You started down roads in your head that led nowhere useful, the dark roads, the worst-case roads, and when you let yourself get too far down one of those, your hands got uncertain and your judgment got clouded. And those were two things he could not afford. So he thought instead about Emily's letters. He had started corresponding with her through a matchmaking agency in Denver, a decision he had made with the same practical calculation he applied to everything else on the ranch. He was 35 years old. He had a working property, a sound house, and no family closer than Missouri. He was not given to loneliness in the dramatic sense. He didn't pine, didn't drink over it, didn't make it anyone else's problem. But there was a quality to his days that had begun to feel not just quiet but empty, in a way that was different from solitude, a way that, if he was honest with himself, had gotten heavier over the years rather than lighter. The agency had sent him 3 potential correspondents. He had written to all of them. He had stopped writing to 2 of them within a month. Emily he had kept writing to for 4 months, and he still wasn't entirely sure he could explain why. She was honest in a way that was almost alarming. She did not describe herself in the flattering, cautious terms that the other women had used. She said plainly that she was 27 and not particularly experienced with ranch life, that she had worked as a bookkeeper for 4 years and was good with numbers but had never milked a cow, that she had opinions that some men found inconvenient, and that she was looking for a situation where those opinions would be listened to rather than managed. He had written back, "I have found inconvenient opinions are usually the honest ones. I would rather hear the honest ones," she had replied. "Then we may get along after all." He had laughed reading that. Actually laughed, alone in his kitchen, which was not something that happened often. He stared at the fire and let himself sit with that memory for a moment. Then he put it away and went to sleep. The second day, the terrain got harder. He was into the foothills proper by mid-morning, the switchback trails, the loose shale, the sections where the pines grew so close together you had to go single file and watch for low branches. He started watching the ground more carefully now, looking for wagon tracks. He found the first sign at noon, a set of wide-wheeled tracks cutting across a meadow, heading northwest, exactly as the station master's wire had described. The tracks were 4 days old, maybe 5 softened by time, but still legible in the softer ground near the meadow's edge. He followed them. By mid-afternoon, the tracks led him to the beginning of the Saddleback Road. He pulled Decker up and looked at what the rain had left behind. The road was a mess, not impassable, but the clay had churned up into deep ruts and then dried hard in that position, frozen into ridges that would jar a wagon axle badly. And in 2 places he could see where small slides had come down from the bank above and crossed the road entirely. Someone driving through here in the rain would have had their hands full. He found the wagon an hour before dark. It was not on the road. It had gone off the road on the steep section, the place he had been worried about, the western grade, where the mountain dropped sharply and the clay got loose. The wagon had slid sideways off the edge, not a long drop but enough to overturn it completely, to send it crashing down through the brush and rocks until it came to rest against a stand of pines 30 feet below the road. One of the horses was dead in the traces still. The other was gone, had probably broken free at some point and run. The wagon itself was on its side, the canvas top torn. The load scattered down the slope, a trunk broken open. Clothing, a box of books, some of them fanned open in the dirt. A woman's traveling bag. Wyatt came down off Decker and went down the slope carefully. He was not yet afraid. He was keeping himself very deliberately in the part of his mind that was practical and methodical. The part that assessed situations without panic, that knew the first thing was to establish facts before you reacted to them. He had learned to live in that part of his mind in the hard years. It had saved him more than once. He catalogued what he saw. 4 days, possibly 5, exposure and injury unknown. No fire had been built near the wagon, he would have seen the ash. Nobody had attempted to move the cargo back to the road. That was either bad or he heard something. He went completely still. It came again and low. And from somewhere past the wagon wreck, further down the slope where the pines thickened. A child's voice. He moved toward it, and as he came around the tilted wagon bed, he saw them. They were sheltered in the space where 3 pines grew together, their trunks close enough to block the wind on 3 sides. Someone had thought that through had gotten 2 people into the most protected spot available and had done it with a clear head under terrible circumstances. The child was a girl, small and thin, 7 or 8 years old, with dark hair matted against her forehead and eyes that were very large and very still. She was wrapped in a coat that was not her size, a woman's coat, pulled around her like a blanket, and she was sitting with her back against the largest pine, watching Wyatt come toward her with an expression that was not quite fear and not quite hope, but something complicated in between. The woman was lying on the ground beside her. She was breathing. Wyatt could see that from 10 feet away, the shallow, slow rise and fall of her chest, and the relief that moved through him at that sight was so physical, so complete, that he had to stop walking for a second and just let it pass. Then he was moving again, crouching down. The woman's face was pale beneath the dirt and the dried blood at her hairline. She'd had a significant blow to the head somewhere along the way. The crusted wound above her left eyebrow told that story clearly. Her right arm was held at an angle that suggested injury. And when he gently checked her wrist, he felt the heat of swelling there. Not broken, he thought, but badly sprained. Her lips were cracked. The child, whoever she was, had been giving her water. He could see the dampness on the woman's chin and the nearly empty canteen beside her. He looked at the girl. "She your mama?" he asked. "Sir." The girl's voice was barely above a whisper, but it was steady. "Her name is Miss Emily. She's the lady I was traveling with." The name landed in him like something solid. He looked back down at the woman. Emily. He had carried her face in his imagination for 4 months, built it out of words she had used to describe herself, out of the personality that had come through so clearly in her letters, out of his own hopes that he had tried to keep reasonable and that had not stayed reasonable at all. He had imagined meeting her on a train platform in good light, with everything under control. He had not imagined this. "What's your name?" he said to the girl. "Clara." "How long have you been here, Clara?" "I don't know." She looked at the sky, then back at him. "Days, I think. She kept telling me someone would come. She kept saying it even when I didn't think it was true anymore." "Well," Wyatt said, "here I am." He worked fast and carefully. He got his bedroll down from Decker and laid Emily on it with as much gentleness as he could manage, while still being efficient. He cleaned the wound on her head. He wrapped her wrist in the bandaging from Mrs. Pryor's medical kit. He built a small fire. She needed warmth. They both did, and he got Clara to eat some jerky, which she did in the mechanical way of someone who had stopped being hungry but knew she needed to. Emily drifted in and out during all of this. She was not unconscious. More than once she made sounds and shifted. And twice she opened her eyes and looked at him without focusing. The way people do when they are between places. He talked to her steadily while he worked, keeping his voice low and even. "You're going to be all right," he said. "I've got you now." He was not certain that was true. But he had learned that the voice mattered in those in-between times. That hearing something steady and calm was its own kind of medicine. Clara fell asleep sitting up, leaning against him. Before the fire had burned down to coals, he sat in the mountain dark with an injured woman and a sleeping child he had never met. And he thought about the fact that Emily Harper had held on for 4 days, had found shelter, had kept the child warm, had kept them both alive with what had to have been a broken down, pain-soaked determination, and something in him that had been tightened to the point of snapping slowly began to unknot. She had not run. She had not changed her mind. She had been fighting to get to him. She had been fighting since the first moment things went wrong. And she had not stopped fighting, not in 4 days of cold and pain and isolation. Not when the child must have been frightened, and she must have been terrified herself. She had held on. He looked at her face in the firelight and felt something shift in his chest that he did not try to name. Then Emily's eyes opened. Not the unfocused half-opening of before. This was different. She was present. She was looking directly at him, and even in the low light he could see that she was gathering herself, pulling herself up from wherever she had been, coming back. "Wyatt," she said. His name in her voice was nothing like he had imagined it. It was rougher, quieter, scraped thin by 4 days of disuse. But there was something in it the way she said it. Like the word itself was a place she had been trying to reach that made every other thing he might have said unnecessary. "Right here," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "I tried to come," she said. "I want you to know that." "I tried." "I know you did," he said. Her eyes stayed on his face a moment longer, reading something there. Or trying to, and then she looked over at Clara, checking automatically. The way someone does when they've been responsible for another person's survival. The child was asleep against his arm. Emily looked at that and something in her expression changed, loosened slightly. "She all right?" Emily asked. "She's fine. She did real well. She's braver than she looks." Emily's voice was fading at the edges. Sleep pulling at her again. "She's been braver than me most days." "I don't think that's true," Wyatt said. But she was already going under again, and he was not sure she heard him. He kept the fire going through the night. In the morning, he rigged a travois from pine branches and rope. He had done it before. Years ago, for a man who had broken his leg 3 miles from anywhere, and he got Emily and Clara and what he could salvage from the cargo onto it, and he started the long, careful way back down through the mountains toward Cutter's Creek. It took 2 days. Emily was awake more often than not by the second day, the nourishment and warmth helping, and sometimes she talked. And sometimes they rode in silence that was not uncomfortable. Clara rode behind Wyatt on Decker with her arms around his waist and her chin on his shoulder. And she asked him questions about Wyoming and the ranch and his horses with the particular relentlessness of a child who has been very frightened for a long time and discovered that talking made it better. He answered everyone. On the evening of the second day, with Cutter's Creek visible in the distance, Emily said, "You don't have to take me to your ranch, Wyatt. You can take me to the hotel in town." "I don't want to presume. The hotel's got 3 rooms and they're all taken," he said. "And the doctor is 3 hours' ride from town. I got a spare room. You both need looking after." "Clara isn't," Emily started. "She was with you when I found you," Wyatt said. "That makes her my responsibility too." "For now." Emily was quiet for a moment. "I had a plan," she said eventually. "For how this would go. For how I would arrive, how I would be. I didn't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden," he said. "You're a woman who held on for 4 days in a mountain wreck with an injured arm and a scared child and managed to keep you both alive until someone could get there." He paused. "Where I come from, that's not a burden, that's character. The silence that followed was different from the ones before. "Thank you," Emily said at last, and her voice was so quiet he barely heard it over the sound of Decker's hooves on the road. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Wait and see what my cooking's like." She laughed at that, a small, surprised sound, not much more than a breath in Wyatt Cole. Riding through the dying summer light with an injured woman and a small girl on a rough-built travois, and everything he had planned for the last 4 months pulled sideways and upside down. Felt something he had not felt in a very long time. He felt like he might be exactly where he was supposed to be. The travois scraped along the dirt road into Cutter's Creek just as the last light drained out of the western sky. And Wyatt felt the town before he saw it, the way eyes follow a man when he's carrying something unexpected. The way conversations die mid-sentence when something worth watching comes through. He didn't look at them. He kept his eyes on the road ahead and his attention on Emily, who had gone quiet in the last mile, not sleeping. Just conserving, the way people do when they've been running on nothing but will for too long and the finish line is finally close enough to believe in. Clara had fallen asleep against his back again, her small hands loose around his waist. Trusting the way only children and animals can trust. Completely and without reservation. The doctor's name was Harlan Briggs. And he lived in a house at the north end of Main Street that also served as his office, his examination room, and, on bad nights, his operating theater. Wyatt had been to see him twice in 11 years once, for a broken rib from a horse that decided it was done being ridden, and once for a gash in his forearm from a fence accident that had needed stitching. He was a competent man who didn't waste words, which Wyatt appreciated. He pulled Decker up in front of Briggs's house and got down. And before he could knock, the door opened. Briggs looked at the travois, then at Wyatt, then back at the travois. "Founder," Wyatt said. "I can see that." Briggs was already reaching for his coat. "How long?" 5 days in the mountains. Head wound. Wrist injury. She's been in and out. Stronger today than yesterday. The child? Traveling with her. Seems unhurt. Hungry and tired. Briggs stepped out and crouched beside Emily, his hands moving with the efficiency of a man who had done this in worse light and worse circumstances. Emily opened her eyes when he touched her head wound and made a sound that was not quite a word. "Easy," Briggs said. "I'm the doctor. You're in Cutter's Creek. You're safe." Emily's eyes moved past him and found Wyatt, standing back to give the doctor room. "He wasn't lying," she said. Her voice was rough but clear. "About the cooking being bad, I assume." Briggs looked at Wyatt with an expression that was as close to amused as the doctor ever got. "She's coherent," he said. "Let's get her inside." They got Emily into the examination room, and Briggs sent his housekeeper, a stout German woman named Mrs. Kellner, to take Clara to the kitchen and feed her. Clara went without protest, though she looked back at Emily twice before she disappeared through the door. Checking, making sure. Wyatt waited in the hallway. He had not allowed himself to feel much of anything during the 2 days coming down through the mountains. There had been too much to manage, too much to watch, too many decisions to make about road and pace and footing. Now standing in Briggs's hallway with nothing to do and nothing to carry, and nothing immediately requiring his action, everything he had been holding back began to press against the inside of his chest like water against a dam. He pressed his shoulders against the wall and breathed. Briggs came out 20 minutes later, drying his hands on a cloth. Concussion. Wrist sprain, not a break. She'll need it wrapped for 2 to 3 weeks, and she should not use it for anything requiring force. The wound on her head is clean, no infection, which is something of a miracle given 5 days without proper care. He looked at Wyatt directly. "She is going to recover fully. I want to be clear about that." Wyatt let out a breath that he had apparently been holding since the mountain. "Good," he said. "She should not be moved again tonight. I'd keep her here through tomorrow at minimum." After Briggs paused. "After that is a conversation I expect you and she will need to have." "Yes," Wyatt said. "We will." He stayed until Mrs. Kellner confirmed that Clara had eaten an entire bowl of soup and half a loaf of bread, and now you sleep on the settee in the parlor, curled up with her knees to her chest and her hands tucked under her chin. He looked in at Emily. She was sleeping too, properly this time. Not the dangerous in and out of the mountain nights, but real, deep, healing sleep, and then he went back out into the street. It was fully dark now. The saloon on 2nd Street was lit up and loud. He could hear it from half a block away. Voices and laughter, and the particular kind of noise that meant men had been drinking long enough to lose their indoor volume. He walked past it without slowing. What he did not expect was the voice that followed him out of the doorway. Cole. He turned. Hank Gruber was standing on the saloon's front step with a drink in his hand, and 3 other men behind him, Riley Marsh, who worked the Gruber feed store part-time, and 2 men Wyatt didn't recognize, weathered and cold-eyed in a way that did not suggest they were passing through for the scenery. "Heard you found yourself a woman after all," Hank said. He was smiling, but the smile had something underneath it that Wyatt didn't like. "I did," Wyatt said. He kept walking. "Here she was in a bad way." Hank stepped off the step. "Here she's over at Doc Briggs's right now." Wyatt stopped. He turned around slowly. "Funny thing." Hank tilted his head. "These 2 gentlemen rode into town this afternoon. Came a long way, they said. Looking for a woman traveling from Omaha." He smiled wider. "Green dress, brown hair, about so tall." One of the strangers stepped forward. He was not a large man, but he moved with the deliberate economy of someone who had learned to use what he had with precision. He had a jaw like a closed fist and eyes that assessed Wyatt the way you assess a fence for weak spots. "My name's Aldous Crane," he said. "I represent Mr. Gerald Whitmore of Omaha, Nebraska. I believe you have located a woman named Emily Harper, who is the legal ward of Mr. Whitmore, and who departed his care without his consent." The word ward landed in the air between them and sat there. Wyatt looked at Crane for a long moment. "Legal ward," he said. "That's correct. How old is Miss Harper?" Something moved behind Crane's eyes. "That's not. She's 27 years old," Wyatt said. "I know that because she told me in writing, in 4 months of letters." "A 27-year-old woman is not anyone's ward," Crane smiled. And it was not a warm smile. "Mr. Whitmore has documents that indicate otherwise. A guardianship arrangement entered into when Miss Harper was in a position of financial vulnerability. Perfectly legal, I assure you. Mr. Whitmore was kind enough to take her in. Kind enough to provide for her. And she repaid that kindness by leaving," Wyatt said. "By stealing from him. And by breaking a legally binding agreement." The 3 other men had fanned out slightly. Not aggressively, but purposefully, in the way that people do when they want to control the geography of a situation. Wyatt noticed. "You'll want to speak to the sheriff about that," Wyatt said. "If you have legal documents, the sheriff is the man to take them to. Not me." Crane's voice was pleasant, reasonable, and entirely without warmth. "We intend to speak to the sheriff first thing tomorrow morning. We simply wanted you to understand the situation, so that you could make things easier. For everyone." "Easier," Wyatt repeated. "Tell us where she is right now." "No trouble, no fuss. You walk away clean. And nobody has to know you were involved in harboring a woman who violated a legal agreement." The street was quiet. Somewhere down the block a door closed. Wyatt looked at Crane. Then at the second man, who had not introduced himself and had not moved but whose right hand had drifted to rest near the revolver at his hip. Then back at Crane. "Miss Harper came to Cutter's Creek of her own free will to enter into a legal agreement, a correspondence arrangement with me," Wyatt said. And his voice was so even it surprised even himself. "She traveled in good faith. She was injured in an accident on the road, which is the only reason she didn't arrive as planned. She is currently receiving medical care, and she will continue to receive medical care until she is well enough to speak for herself." He paused. "At which point, if you have legal documents, you will present them to the sheriff. And the sheriff will determine their validity, and Miss Harper will be consulted about her own situation." because she is a grown woman and not a parcel to be collected. Crane looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, as if Wyatt had confirmed something he already suspected. "I see," he said. "Well, we'll be in town a while." Then, "Cutter's Creek has a hotel," Wyatt said. "Good night, Mr. Crane." He walked away. He felt their eyes on his back the whole length of the street. He went directly to the sheriff's office. Buck Halsey was the sheriff of Cutter's Creek, a lean, gray-haired man of 53 who had held the position for 9 years, and who had, in Wyatt's experience, the particular quality of a good sheriff. He was neither easily impressed nor easily alarmed. And he believed in looking at paperwork before he believed in anything else. Wyatt told him everything: the letters, the train, the telegraph, the mountains, Emily, Clara, then Crane, and Whitmore, and the word Ward, and the man with his hand near his revolver. Halsey listened without interrupting. Then he leaned back in his chair and laced his fingers together over his chest. "Legal ward," he said. "That's what he called it. Of a 27-year-old woman. Yes. That's an unusual arrangement. That was my thought too," Wyatt said. "I'll want to see their documents tomorrow morning, before they go anywhere near Briggs's place." Halsey's voice was even and certain. "And I'll want to speak to Miss Harper myself, once she's able. A guardianship claim over an adult woman is not nothing, Wyatt, and I won't pretend it is. But neither is it something I act on without looking hard at the particulars. I appreciate that. These men give you any trouble tonight?" "You come straight here." "Yes, sir." He rode back to the ranch alone. The house was exactly as he'd left it, lamps unlit, the kitchen cold, the second chair sitting empty at the table. He didn't light the lamp. He sat in the dark for a while, thinking. Gerald Whitmore of Omaha. Emily had written about leaving a difficult situation. She had written about a position of financial vulnerability. Those had been Crane's own words, thrown out like they were harmless, but they weren't harmless. They told a story. A young woman in financial trouble. Someone stepping in to help. An arrangement signed under pressure. And then, years later, a woman deciding she was done being grateful for help that had turned into a cage. He thought about the way she had looked at him in the mountain firelight. The way she'd said his name. She had fought for 5 days to get to him. He was not going to let a man she had escaped drag her back. He was at Briggs's house at 7 in the morning. Mrs. Kellner opened the door before he knocked, which told him she had been watching for him. "The little one's awake," she said. "Been asking for you since 6. Clara was sitting at the kitchen table with a bowl of oatmeal, wearing a dress that was several sizes too big and had clearly been borrowed from Mrs. Kellner's considerable wardrobe. She looked up when Wyatt came in, and the relief on her face was so complete and unguarded that it hit him somewhere behind the sternum. "You came back," she said. "Said I would," he replied, and sat across from her. She ate 3 more spoonfuls of oatmeal, watching him, then put her spoon down with the gravity of someone about to say something important. "Miss Emily was asking for you too," she said. "I heard her through the wall." "How do you know Miss Emily?" Wyatt asked. Clara's expression shifted, something complicated moving behind her eyes. The way complicated things move behind children's eyes when they're deciding how much truth to give you. "I was on the wagon," she said. "My mama put me on the wagon in Junction. She said Miss Emily would look after me until we got to Wyoming, and then she'd send for me." She paused. "She said it wouldn't be long." Wyatt kept his face neutral. "Where's your mama now, Clara?" "Junction, I think. She works at the boarding house there." Clara picked her spoon back up and stared into the oatmeal. "She said she couldn't bring me yet. She said the man she lived with didn't want me around. She said once she saved enough, she'd come to Wyoming and we'd all live somewhere better. The man she lived with didn't want me around." He let that sit without comment. "Miss Emily was nice to me," Clara added. Unprompted. "Even when she was hurt and it was cold and I was scared. She kept telling me stories so I wouldn't think about it too much." "She knows a lot of stories." "What kind of stories?" Clara considered. mostly true ones, about women who went somewhere hard and made it work. She looked at him with dark, serious eyes. She told me about you. She said you were the kind of man who kept promises. And that was worth more than almost anything. Wyatt did not say anything for a moment. She told me that, he said finally. She said it a lot, Clara confirmed. At night, mostly when she thought I was asleep. She'd say it kind of quiet, like she was reminding herself. He heard the door to the examination room open, and then Briggs's voice in the hallway, low and professional. A moment later, the doctor appeared in the kitchen doorway. She's asking to see you, Briggs said. She's not going to rest until she does. So we might as well get it over with. Emily was sitting up in the narrow examination bed, propped against two pillows, her injured wrist wrapped neatly and resting on her lap. The wound on her head had been cleaned and dressed, and some of the color had come back to her face, still pale, still marked by 5 days of survival, but present. Solid herself. He had built a version of her in his mind over 4 months of letters. She was nothing like that version. She was more. She was a real person, sharper and more complicated and more interesting than any image he could have constructed from words on paper, and the wrongness of his imagined version surprised him. Though it shouldn't have. That was the nature of people. They always exceeded what you thought you knew. You look better, he said. I feel better. She studied him with the directness he had come to expect from her letters. You look tired. I'm fine, you've been to see the sheriff. It wasn't a question. He nodded. Crane found you, she said. Not a question either. Her voice had gone careful. Last night, outside the saloon, she closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were steady and clear, and resolved in a way that told him she'd known this was coming, and had made her decisions about it, somewhere in the mountain dark. I need to tell you everything, she said. Not the version I was going to tell you eventually. Piece by piece, when I thought you'd had time to know me better. The whole thing. Now before Crane goes to Halsey. I'm listening, Wyatt said. He pulled the chair from the corner and sat. She told him. Gerald Whitmore had been a business associate of her father's. When her father died, she was 21, the estate had been found to be in serious debt. The kind of debt that left nothing behind, not even the house. Whitmore had stepped in. He'd paid the debts. He'd offered Emily a position in his household managing his accounts, his correspondence, his household books, which she was qualified to do and which would, he explained, clear the debt over time. She had signed a contract. She had not understood, at 21, grieving and frightened, and with no other options visible to her, that the contract contained language about her status in his household that would become a problem later. Language about her obligations. Language that had been explained to her as routine, but that, she had come to understand, was not routine at all. She stopped, chose her next word carefully. He was not violent with me. I want to be precise about that. But what he wanted was not an employee. He wanted someone who was permanently obligated. Someone who couldn't leave without his permission. Someone who had signed a document saying as much. Her voice was even. But underneath it was the particular flatness of someone describing something they have processed very thoroughly in order to survive it. When I began corresponding with the agency in Denver, when I started writing to you, he found out. He told me if I left, he would have me brought back. He said the contract was legally binding. He said no court in Nebraska would side with a woman against a business arrangement. Was he right? Wyatt asked. I don't know, she said. That's the honest answer. I don't know if the contract is enforceable the way he says it is. I know he believed it was. I know Crane believes it is. And I know that I was not going to spend the rest of my life finding out. She met his eyes. I took what was mine when I left, my correspondence. My books, the household accounting ledgers, because in those ledgers are 5 years of records showing things that Whitmore would very much prefer not to have examined by a court. A pause. I took them as insurance, not to use against him. just so he'd have a reason to leave me alone. Wyatt was quiet for a moment. And the ledgers, he said. In the trunk. On the mountain. I salvaged what I could from the wreck. I have the trunk, she exhaled. Her voice was quieter now. Stripped down. You didn't know any of this when you went looking for me. You went looking for a woman you'd exchanged letters with for 4 months. And you found something considerably more complicated. Yes, he said. You can still start it again. The arrangement between us. The correspondence that was made in different circumstances. If you want to step back from it, I understand. You would not be wrong to. This is not what you agreed to. He looked at her for a long moment. I agreed, he said, to take a chance on a person I believed was worth taking a chance on. That's generous. It's not generous. It's accurate. He leaned forward slightly, his forearms on his knees. You held together for 5 days in a mountain wreck with a head injury and a scared child and no supplies. You kept her alive. You kept yourself alive. You were afraid and you held on anyway. He paused. That's the person I wrote those letters to. That's exactly who I thought you were. Emily looked at him steadily. Something moved in her face, not tears, not quite. But the thing that comes before them in people who have been too determined to cry for a long time and suddenly find themselves in the presence of something that makes the determination falter. The sheriff, she said. Halsey, what does he think? He wants to see Crane's documents before anything else. He's careful. He won't act on a claim without looking hard at it. Wyatt paused. But I won't pretend Crane doesn't have tools available to him. If Whitmore has lawyers and money and a signed contract, he has leverage. He has all of those things, Emily said. There was no self-pity in it, just fact. Then we need to be smarter than leverage. She looked at him. We? Yes, Wyatt said simply. We, the word sat between them. She looked at her wrapped wrist, then back at him. The ledgers, she said. If someone who understood accounts, someone impartial were to look at them. 5 years of household accounts, Wyatt. Expense figures that don't reconcile. Money moved to accounts that shouldn't exist. Business receipts that record transactions with men who, I happen to know, would be very alarmed to have their relationship with Gerald Whitmore examined. She looked at him. Crane said I stole from him. But what I actually took was the record of what he stole. The room was very quiet. Outside, Wyatt could hear Main Street waking up, boots on the boardwalk. A horse being led past, the distant sound of the smithy beginning its work. Ordinary town sounds. The world continuing without caring what was happening inside this room. You told me you were a bookkeeper, he said. A good one. And those ledgers would be very interesting to a federal revenue officer, Emily said. Or to a territorial judge. Or to any number of people Whitmore has done business with over the years who don't know how badly they've been cheated. Wyatt stood up from the chair. He walked to the window. He stood there for a moment with his back to her. Not because he needed to think his thinking was essentially done, but because he needed a second to be sure of himself before he said what he was about to say. He had learned the hard way that there was a difference between a decision made in a moment of emotion and a decision made with the whole of yourself. And he wanted this to be the second kind. He turned back. Crane is going to Halsey this morning, he said, which means by this afternoon. This town is going to know your situation. And Cutter's Creek talks. He said it plainly, without softening. By tonight, everyone in a 20-mile radius will know there are men from Omaha with papers claiming some kind of hold over you. I know, Emily said. That's going to be hard. I know that too. He looked at her. Are you ashamed? He asked. She met his gaze without flinching. No, she said. I was afraid for a long time. I'm done being afraid. He nodded once. Then here's what we do, he said. You rest, you heal. I go talk to Halsey again this time with more information than I had last night. There's a lawyer in Laramie named Garrett Finch who handles land and contract disputes and who I've had occasion to trust. I'm going to send him a wire. And the ledgers, he paused, the ledgers are going to stay exactly where they are until we decide together what to do with them. Emily was watching him with an expression he couldn't fully read. "Why are you doing this?" she said. It was not a rhetorical question. She genuinely wanted to know. He considered giving her an easy answer. There were several available. All of them true, all of them incomplete. Instead, he gave her the true one. "Because you fought for 5 days to keep a promise," he said. "And I have never in my life walked away from a person who fought that hard." He picked up his hat from where he'd rested it on the chair. "I'll be back this afternoon," he said. "Tell Clara I said good morning." He had his hand on the door when she said his name. Wyatt. He turned. "Thank you," she said, "for finding me." He looked at her for a moment, at this woman who had crossed half a continent to reach him and nearly died doing it, who was sitting in a borrowed bed in his town, with men from Omaha already moving against her, who had told him the hardest truth about herself, without flinching, and was watching him now with eyes that were tired and clear and completely undefeated. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "This isn't over." He stepped out into the morning. Aldous Crane was standing at the end of the block. He was not alone. The second man, the one with the quiet hands and the revolver, was beside him. And they were both watching the door of Briggs's house with the patience of men who were accustomed to waiting and who had already decided how things were going to go. Crane saw Wyatt come out. He raised one hand in something that was almost a greeting and smiled. Wyatt looked at him for a long moment across the morning street. Then he turned and walked directly toward the sheriff's office. Because Emily Harper had crossed mountains to keep her promise. And Wyatt Cole did not lose. Halsey had the documents spread across his desk when Wyatt walked back in. And the look on the sheriff's face was the particular look of a man who had hoped something would be simple and had discovered it was not. "Sit down," Halsey said. Wyatt sat. "Crane came in at 8 o'clock sharp," Halsey said. "Had a lawyer with him. Not the quiet one, a different man. Came in on last night's stage, name of Prescott. Contract law out of Omaha." He tapped the papers on his desk with 2 fingers. "These documents are real, Wyatt. I mean that in the specific sense the paper is real. The signatures are real, the notary seal is real. I am not in a position to stand here and tell you they're forgeries." "Are they enforceable?" Wyatt asked. "That," Halsey said, "is a different question. And it's not a question I can answer. It's a question for a judge." He leaned back. "What I can tell you is what the contract says. It describes a financial arrangement entered into in 1879 between Gerald Whitmore and a Miss Emily Louise Harper, age 21, wherein Whitmore assumed responsibility for debts accrued by the estate of one Robert Harper, deceased, and in exchange Miss Harper agreed to serve as household manager for Whitmore's residence in Omaha for a period of, and here's where it gets interesting, an indefinite term, to be concluded at the mutual agreement of both parties." He let that land. Wyatt felt something cold move through him. "Mutual agreement," he said. "Which means she can't leave without his consent. That's what Prescott says. And I cannot tell you he's wrong about the reading of it." Halsey's voice was flat and careful. "Now, there's a separate document. A complaint filed with the territorial court in Laramie 3 weeks ago. Whitmore filed before she even left. Wyatt, he knew she was planning to go. He had this in motion before she set foot on that wagon." Wyatt was very still. "He filed a complaint before she left," he said, "claiming breach of contract and theft of property. Specifically, household account ledgers valued at." Halsey squinted at the page, $240. "Which is a very specific number for someone to put on a stack of accounting books." "She told me about the ledgers," Wyatt said. "She told me what's in them." Halsey looked at him steadily. "What's in them?" 5 years of accounts that she believes show Whitmore stealing from his own business partners. Moving money, false receipts. The kind of records a federal revenue officer would find extremely interesting. The room was quiet for 5 full seconds. Then Halsey said, "Wyatt agreed, if that's true," Halsey said slowly. "Then Whitmore's complaint about the ledgers isn't about their monetary value. It's about getting them back before anyone reads them. That's what I think. And if those ledgers contain what she says they contain, then Crane isn't here about a contract," Wyatt said. "He's here to recover evidence." Halsey stood up and walked to his window and stood there with his hands behind his back, looking at the street. Outside, Wyatt could see Crane and Prescott crossing Main Street toward the hotel, moving with the unhurried confidence of men who believed the machinery was already running in their favor. "I can't hold those men on nothing," Halsey said. "They have legal documents. They have standing. If Prescott takes this to the circuit judge in Laramie, he gets a hearing within the week. I know. Which means you've got maybe 5 days. 6 if we're lucky. I've already sent a wire to Garrett Finch in Laramie." Halsey turned from the window. "Finch is good. He's expensive. He's good," Wyatt said. "That's the part that matters. He was back at Briggs's house by mid-morning. Clara was in the doctor's garden, which Mrs. Kellner was using as a kind of benign occupation. She'd given the child a trowel and a section of earth that needed turning, and Clara was attacking it with the focused energy of someone who needed to do something with her hands. Emily was out of bed. This surprised him. She was sitting in the chair by the window in the examination room. Fully dressed, someone had retrieved clothing from the salvaged trunk with her wrapped wrist in her lap, and the other hand holding a cup of tea that Mrs. Kellner had clearly forced on her. She looked up when Wyatt came in, and her eyes went immediately to his face, reading it. "Halsey saw the documents," she said. "He did. And they're real. The contract exists. It says what Whitmore claims it says. And a Laramie court will see it within the week, unless Finch can find a reason to slow things down." She nodded once, with the acceptance of someone who had already prepared for this answer. "The indefinite term clause," she said. "You knew about it. I knew about it the day I signed it. I was 21 and desperate, and I told myself that a reasonable man would never hold a person to something so open-ended. That eventually, a year, 2 years, he would let me go." Her voice was entirely without self-pity. "I was wrong about the reasonable man part. There's something else," Wyatt said. "Halsey told me Whitmore filed the complaint 3 weeks ago. Before you left." Emily went very still. "Before I left," she repeated. "He knew you were planning to go. He had the legal machinery in motion before you stepped on that wagon." Something shifted in her face, not fear, but a recalibration, the expression of someone who has been running a calculation and just discovered a variable they hadn't accounted for. "He read my letters," she said. It was quiet and certain. "I kept your letters in my room." I thought. She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "I thought I had been careful." "How many letters?" Wyatt asked. "All of them. 4 months' worth." She looked at him. "He knows everything we discussed. Everything I told you about myself. Everything you told me, he's read all of it." The implication settled over the room like weather. Crane hadn't come to Cutter's Creek following a trail. He'd come knowing exactly where to go, exactly who to find, exactly what the situation was. He had read 4 months of their correspondence, and he had arrived prepared. "The ledgers," Wyatt said. "Where are they?" "In the trunk. Bottom layer. Wrapped in canvas." He had the trunk at the ranch. He'd taken it off the travois and put it in the back room without opening it. He needed to get back there before Crane had any reason, legal or otherwise, to come looking. "I need to go," he said. "I need to get back to the ranch and get those ledgers somewhere Crane can't reach them." Emily stood up from the chair. "I'm coming with you," she said. "You have a concussion." Briggs said rest and limited movement. "He didn't say I couldn't ride in a wagon." Her chin was up, and her voice was the voice from the letters, the one that said she had opinions that some men found inconvenient. "They're my ledgers, Wyatt. I know every page. I know where the relevant entries are. I know which names matter. I know what a lawyer needs to see first. You need me there." He wanted to argue. He could see 3 good reasons to argue. But she was looking at him with an expression that made very clear she had already decided. And he had already learned in a short time that decided was a fixed state where Emily Harper was concerned. "Clara comes with us," he said. "Obviously," she said. They were on the road within the hour. Wyatt drove the wagon, Emily beside him on the bench, with her wrist braced against her ribs. and Clara in the bed behind them sitting on a folded blanket. Watching Wyoming pass with enormous eyes, Mrs. Kellner had sent them off with a basket of food, and a look that said she disapproved of all of this, but understood it was happening regardless. Nobody spoke for the first mile. Then Clara said from behind them, "Is that man going to make Miss Emily go back?" Wyatt glanced at Emily. "No," Emily said firmly, "he's not." "How do you know?" "Because I have evidence that makes him more afraid of me than I am of him. I just have to make sure the right people see it." Clara considered this. "Like a trump card?" "Exactly like a trump card. My mama plays cards," Clara said. "She says the trick isn't having the best card. It's making the other person think you do. Until you actually play it." Emily turned to look at the girl. "Your mother," Emily said carefully, "is smarter than she may appear." "She's very smart," Clara said, with the matter-of-fact conviction of someone who has no doubt about this. "She just makes bad choices about men." Wyatt kept his eyes on the road and said nothing, because there was nothing to add to that. The ranch looked exactly as he'd left it, the house solid against the afternoon light. The horses in the pasture, the yard quiet. He helped Emily down from the wagon with more care than she would have preferred. And she accepted it without comment because she was still pale, and he could see that the ride had cost her something. The trunk was in the back room, exactly where he'd left it. Emily went directly to it and crouched, then stood immediately. Because crouching was apparently on the list of things that aggravated a concussion and directed him to the bottom layer with the precise memory of someone who had packed that trunk themselves. The ledgers were 4 of them, thick and cloth-covered, each labeled on the spine in neat handwriting with a year. He lifted them out and set them on the table, and Emily sat in the chair across from them and pulled the first one open with her good hand. 1880 is where it starts, she said. "Look here." She turned pages with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly what she was looking for. "These are the household accounts: food, staff, maintenance. All legitimate. But here..." She stopped at a page and turned the book so he could see it. "These entries. Consulting fees, equipment purchases, materials, all of them paid to companies that, when I tracked them back, and it took me 2 years to track them back, don't exist." Wyatt looked at the column of numbers. "He invented the companies," he said, "and invoiced himself. Which means money moved out of the business accounts into his own accounts through fictional expenses. Over 5 years, the total..." She flipped to the back page of the 4th ledger, where she had, in her own handwriting, compiled a summary, "is approximately $14,000. Wyatt looked at that number. "That's not a bookkeeping error," he said. "No," Emily said. "That's a federal crime." She paused. "I didn't understand all of it when I started keeping the books. By the time I understood what I was looking at, I'd been there 3 years. I knew too much to be safe, and I wasn't free to leave." She ran her finger along the page carefully. "So I kept recording everything, exactly and completely. Because I knew that if I ever got out, I was going to need proof." "You spent 2 years documenting him," Wyatt said. "I spent 2 years making sure he couldn't come after me without risking worse coming after him." She looked up. "The only mistake I made was underestimating how much he hated losing. Enough to file a complaint before I was even gone. Enough to send Crane all this way." Wyatt stood up straight and looked at the ledgers on the table. "Finch needs to see these," he said. "Not a copy. The originals, I know. Which means getting them to Laramie. Which means..." The sound of hoofbeats cut him off. "Not one horse. Several." He moved to the window. "Crane's man, the quiet one." The one with the revolver was coming up the ranch road at a trot. He wasn't alone. 2 other riders flanked him, men Wyatt had not seen before. And they had the look of men who had been hired for a specific purpose and didn't much care what that purpose required. "Get the ledgers," Wyatt said. His voice dropped to the particular register that meant he was operating now, not discussing. "Take them to the back room. The panel behind the wood stove, press the left corner. It opens. Put them in there." Emily didn't ask questions. She was on her feet with the ledgers stacked against her good arm before he finished the sentence. Wyatt went to the door. He opened it and stepped out onto the porch before the riders reached the yard. Because a man who comes to his own door on his own terms has a different position than a man who answers a knock. He stood in the center of the porch, with his thumbs hooked in his belt, and watched them come. The quiet man stopped his horse at the edge of the yard. He had a document in his hand, folded, official-looking. "Cole," he said. "My name is Reeves. I have a court order authorizing recovery of property belonging to Gerald Whitmore of Omaha, Nebraska. Specifically, 4 accounting ledgers taken from his residence in violation of the contract signed by Emily Harper." He held up the folded paper. "I need to come inside." "Who issued that order?" Wyatt said. "Territorial Court, Laramie." "When?" Reeves paused a fraction of a second too long. 3 days ago." Wyatt looked at him. "The Territorial Court in Laramie issued a recovery order before you arrived in Cutter's Creek." "That's correct. You were already in transit when it was issued." "The order was filed in advance of Halsey," Wyatt said. Clara appeared in the doorway behind him, looking at the riders with wide, careful eyes. He didn't turn around, but he kept his voice steady and clear. "Clara, go find Mrs. Emily and stay with her." He heard Clara's feet retreat inside. He looked at Reeves. "I'm going to ask you to ride back to town and show that document to Sheriff Halsey," he said. "Because a recovery order issued by a territorial court is something the local law needs to verify before I let anyone into my home to search it. That is my legal right, and I am exercising it." Reeves's jaw tightened. "The order is valid. Then Halsey will confirm that and you can come back with the sheriff, like the law requires." Wyatt didn't move. Didn't raise his voice. Didn't reach for anything. He just stood there, all of him, all 6 feet of 11 Wyoming winters, and the absolute certainty of a man in his own land. "Until then, you're trespassing." The 2 flanking riders exchanged a look. Reeves stared at Wyatt for a long, measuring moment. Then he folded the document and turned his horse. They rode back down the road, and Wyatt watched them go until they were out of sight. Then he went inside. Emily was in the back room, standing with her arms around her own middle, and Clara pressed against her side. She had put the ledgers behind the panel. He could see the wood stove had been pulled slightly from the wall and pushed back. She looked at him when he came in. "That order," she said. "It's not legitimate, is it?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "It might be. Prescott is capable enough to have filed for it. And Laramie judges have issued orders on less." He paused. "But the timing is wrong. They were already moving toward the ranch before Halsey had a chance to send word. Which means either they had the order before they came to Wyoming, or the order doesn't exist yet, and Reeves was bluffing," Emily finished. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "He'll go to Halsey," she said. "And Halsey will either validate the order or he won't. If he does, we have maybe 2 hours before they come back with the sheriff." Wyatt looked at the wood stove. "I need to get those ledgers to Finch. Tonight. Laramie is 3 hours by hard ride. I know, you can't leave." Her voice was very steady. "If you leave, there's no one here when they come back. It'll be me, Clara, and 4 accounting ledgers, and no legal standing." He knew she was right. He had already known it before she said it, which was why the problem was sitting so heavily in his chest. He needed someone he trusted. He went to the door and looked toward the nearest neighboring property, the Aldermans. Half a mile east, good people, steady. But they were farmers, not fighters, and what he needed right now was someone who was both. Then he thought of Tom Garrett. Tom Garrett had come to Cutter's Creek 7 years ago, under circumstances he'd never fully explained. Bought a small place 2 miles north of Wyatt's ranch, and had proceeded to become the most reliably useful person Wyatt knew. He was 40 years old, quiet, and had the kind of capability that announced itself not through aggression, but through the fact that difficult situations tended to resolve themselves in his vicinity. Wyatt went to his writing desk and wrote a note, fast and specific. The exact facts and the exact request, and called for Clara. She appeared immediately. which told him she'd been close. "I need you to take a horse," he said. "Just a small ride." "You ride?" Clara stood up straighter. "My mama taught me. There's a bay mare in the south pasture. She's gentle. She knows the way. I need you to ride to the property 2 miles north and give this note to a man named Tom Garrett. Tell him Wyatt Cole needs him now. Can you do that?" Clara looked at the note, then at Emily, then back at Wyatt. "Yes," she said. "I can do that." Emily put her good hand on the girl's shoulder. "Ride straight there and straight back." Clara was out the door in 30 seconds. Wyatt looked at Emily. "Tell me the most important entries," he said. "Not all of them. The ones that no judge can ignore. The ones that are so clear that even a Whitmore-friendly court can't explain them away." Emily sat down at the table and closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds, the gesture of someone calling up a perfectly organized mental file. "March 1881, she said. "Consulting fee of $800 to Western Territorial Supply Company. No address, no contact, no corresponding delivery record. That company does not exist. I confirmed it through the Territorial Business Registry in 1883. Wyatt wrote it down. September 1882. Materials purchase, $1,200. To Harmon Brothers Construction. No Harmon Brothers is registered in Nebraska, Kansas, or the Territories. She kept going methodical. Precise, pulling 5 years of fraud from memory like she was reading from a page. November 1883. This one is the most important, a transfer of $3,000 to an account at the First Mercantile Bank of St. Louis, account holder listed as G. Holdings. GW Holdings is Gerald Whitmore. He invoiced himself, paid himself, and recorded it as a business expense. That alone is federal wire fraud. Wyatt looked at his notes. "Who else did he steal from?" he asked. "You said he had business partners. Robert Aldrich of Chicago. He's a silent partner in 2 of Whitmore's textile contracts. Based on the ledger entries I've seen, he's been defrauded of approximately $4,000 over 3 years. She paused. "And a man named Samuel Voss of Kansas City. Import contract. Another $3,000 minimum. Would Aldrich and Voss cooperate with a federal investigation if they knew?" "Aldrich would be furious," Emily said. "He's a careful businessman. Being defrauded would damage his reputation, and he'd know it." She met Wyatt's eyes. "These are not men who absorb losses quietly." Tom Garrett arrived at the ranch in just under an hour, which meant he'd been moving fast from the moment Clara reached him. He came in through the door with his hat in his hand, and his eyes already reading the room. "Clara told me what she knew," he said, which was most of it. "What do you need?" "I need a rider I trust to take a package to Laramie tonight and put it personally in the hands of Garrett Finch." He paused. "And I need the rider to understand that if Crane's men are watching the road, the package cannot be found." Tom looked at him without expression for a moment. "I know the back way through Sadler's Ridge," he said. "Longer, but nobody watches it. Can you make Laramie by morning? If I leave in the next hour." Tom glanced at Emily. "You're the woman from the letters." "I am," Emily said. "He rode 2 days into the mountains looking for you." "I know," she said quietly. "Then you understand why I'm going to Laramie tonight without him needing to say please." Tom looked at Wyatt. "Give me the package." Wyatt looked at Emily. This was her call. They were her ledgers, her evidence, her 5 years of careful documentation. He would not make that decision for her. She looked at Tom Garrett for a long moment, reading him the way she'd learned to read people in 5 years of watching a man whose every word was designed to deceive. Then she went to the back room. She came back with all 4 ledgers and set them on the table. "Tell Finch that the entry dated September 14th, 1882, in the 3rd volume, is where he should begin," she said. "And tell him that Robert Aldrich of Chicago is owed money and would likely confirm entries in Volume 2 if contacted." Tom looked at the ledgers, then at Emily. "Yes, ma'am." And something in the way he said it, not patronizing, not deferential, but the specific respect of one capable person recognizing another made Emily's chin come up slightly. Tom was out the door with the ledgers wrapped in oilskin and tucked in his saddlebag within 10 minutes. Wyatt stood in the yard and watched him go until the darkness took him. When he turned back, Emily was standing in the doorway. Clara was a shape behind her, barely visible in the lamplight. "If Crane comes back with Halsey tonight," Emily said. "The ledgers are gone. He has no evidence of theft, and without the theft claim." "The contract dispute is just a contract dispute," Wyatt said. Still serious. "Finch needs time," Emily said. "He'll have it," Wyatt said. "I'm going to make sure of it." He went inside and wrote 3 letters. The first to Robert Aldrich in Chicago, describing the relevant ledger entries and asking for written confirmation of the business relationship. The second to Samuel Voss in Kansas City. The third to the United States Federal Revenue Office in Denver. Addressed to the supervising officer, containing a precise and factual description of the accounting irregularities he had been verbally informed of by Emily Harper, whose documentation was currently in transit to an attorney in Laramie. He sealed all 3 and set them aside for the Morning Post. Then he sat back and looked at the table and thought about Gerald Whitmore, sitting in Omaha with his lawyers and his documents, believing that money and legal machinery were sufficient to recover what he'd lost. He didn't understand what he was dealing with. He had sent men to retrieve accounting ledgers. What he hadn't accounted for was that the woman who had kept those ledgers had spent 5 years learning exactly what was in them, had memorized the relevant entries, had identified his victims, and had, in a quiet kitchen in Wyoming, just finished describing a federal fraud case to a man who had already put it in writing and sent it to 3 separate destinations. The ledgers were evidence, but Emily Harper was the witness. And you could send men to recover evidence. You couldn't send men to recover a testimony already given. He heard a small sound and looked up. Clara was standing in the kitchen doorway in borrowed clothes that were too big, watching him with her serious dark eyes. "Is Miss Emily going to be safe?" she said. Wyatt looked at the girl, the small person who had held Emily's hand in a mountain wreck for 5 days, who had given her water and stayed close and believed, even when she said she didn't, that someone was coming. "Yes," he said. Clara looked at him. "You promise?" He had not made a promise he didn't intend to keep since he was 17 years old. "Yes," he said, "I promise." Clara nodded once, satisfied, and went back down the hall. Wyatt blew out the lamp and sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about Aldous Crane and what the morning was going to bring. Whatever it brought, he was ready. And Emily Harper, with her wrapped wrist and her perfect memory, and 5 years of evidence stored in a mind that Crane could not search and Whitmore could not recover, was more than ready. The trap had been set. Now they waited to see if Gerald Whitmore was foolish enough to walk into it. Crane came back at dawn, not with Reeves and the hired riders this time. With Halsey. Wyatt heard the horses before he saw them, and he was already at the door by the time they came up the ranch road, Halsey in front, his face carrying the expression of a man doing his job and not enjoying it, and Crane half a length behind him, wearing satisfaction like a man who had paid for it. Wyatt stepped onto the porch. "Morning, Buck," he said. "Morning, Wyatt." Halsey pulled up and dismounted with the deliberate care of a man who wanted to control the pace of what was about to happen. "I need to speak with Miss Harper. Crane's lawyer presented the court order to me last night. It's legitimate. Judge Alderman in Laramie signed it 4 days ago." 4 days ago, Wyatt said. "Before Crane arrived here." "Yes." "So Whitmore filed for a recovery order on property he claimed was stolen before the woman he was claiming stole it had actually left his house." Halsey's expression didn't change. "That's a question for the court. Right now I have a signed order and I need to execute it. I need to search the premises for 4 accounting ledgers, and I need to speak with Miss Harper regarding the contract claim." Crane had not dismounted. He was sitting his horse at the edge of the yard, watching Wyatt with the composed patience of a man who had already won, and was simply waiting for the formalities to conclude. "Come in," Wyatt said. He stepped back from the door. Halsey came up the steps. Crane moved to follow. "The order is for the sheriff," Wyatt said, looking at Crane without heat. "Not for you." Crane stopped. "I represent Mr. Whitmore's." "You're welcome to wait in the yard," Wyatt said. "The sheriff can conduct his search without assistance." Crane looked at Halsey. Halsey said, "Wait here, Mr. Crane." Something moved behind Crane's eyes, fast and cold. There and gone. He settled back in his saddle. Wyatt took Halsey through the house. He did not rush. He opened every door, moved aside everything Halsey indicated, pulled back the rug in the front room, opened the chest at the foot of his bed. He was thorough and unhurried, and completely cooperative. Because a man who has nothing to hide cooperates fully, and a man who has already moved what mattered has nothing left to hide. When they reached the back room, Halsey looked at the wood stove. He looked at the panel behind it. He crossed to it and pressed the corner, and it opened. Empty. Halsey stood looking at the empty compartment for a moment. "I'm not going to ask you when you built that," he said. "Good idea," Wyatt agreed. Halsey closed the panel and turned around. His face was not angry. He was not a man who wasted energy on anger, but it was serious in a way that meant he was thinking hard. "Those ledgers, Wyatt. I don't have them." "That's a careful way to put it. It's an accurate way to put it." Halsey looked at him for a long moment. "If those ledgers contain what you told me they contain, they need to be in the hands of someone who can act on it. Not just used as leverage in a personal dispute." "I know that," Wyatt said. "I've already taken steps to make sure the right people see them." "How far along are those steps?" "Far enough that by the time a Laramie court opens its doors this morning, Garrett Finch will be standing outside them." Something shifted in Halsey's expression, not quite approval, but the specific look of a man who has decided something, is out of his hands, and is at peace with that. "Emily Harper," he said. "I need to speak with her." She was in the kitchen. She had been up since before dawn. Wyatt had heard her moving, had looked in and seen her sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and the particular stillness of someone running through everything they know and making sure they know it well enough. She looked up when they came in, and she stood, because she was not a woman who sat while things were being decided about her. "Sheriff," she said. Halsey took off his hat. "I need to ask you some questions about the contract between yourself and Gerald Whitmore." "Yes." "Sir, ask them." He did. He was methodical, and fair. Wyatt had always respected that about Halsey. The absolute evenness with which he gathered information. He did not lead, did not pressure, did not suggest. He asked and he listened. Emily answered everything. She described the contract, the circumstances under which she signed it, the nature of her work in Whitmore's household, the progression of her understanding of what she had agreed to. She described the moment she realized the household accounts contained fraudulent entries. She described 2 years of documentation. She described the letters to Wyatt, Whitmore reading them, and the complaint she now knew had been filed before she left. Halsey wrote in his notebook throughout. When she finished, he looked at his notes for a moment. Then he looked up. "Miss Harper, are you asking for my protection?" "I'm asking for the law's protection," she said. "Which I understand may not be the same thing, depending on how a court reads that contract." "But yes." Halsey closed his notebook. "I'm going to be straight with you. The contract is real, and a court will hear Whitmore's claim. I cannot prevent that. What I can do is ensure you are not physically removed from this jurisdiction before that hearing takes place. You are not under arrest, you are not a fugitive, and no man is going to put you on a horse against your will in my county." Emily's shoulders dropped a fraction, just a fraction. The release of something she had been bracing against. "Thank you," she said. Halsey turned to Wyatt. "I'm going to go tell Crane the ledgers aren't here and that Miss Harper will be available for a legal proceeding in Laramie when the court schedules one. That's all I can give him today." "That's enough for today," Wyatt said. Halsey went back out to the porch. Wyatt followed him as far as the doorway and stood there watching the conversation, Halsey speaking evenly. Crane's face doing something complicated, Reeves sitting his horse with the flat expression of a man recalculating. After 2 minutes, Crane said something sharp that Wyatt couldn't hear. Halsey's response was 2 words. Crane's mouth tightened. He turned his horse and rode. Halsey came back to the porch steps. "He's not done," he said. "I know," Wyatt said. "He's going to wire Whitmore. There'll be more lawyers. Possibly a federal officer if they can argue the ledger theft across state lines." "I know that too." Halsey put his hat back on. "How long do you need?" Wyatt thought about Tom Garrett riding through Sadler's Ridge in the dark. About Finch standing outside a Laramie courthouse at first light. About 3 letters and envelopes on his desk waiting for the morning post. "A week," he said. Halsey nodded once and rode away. The morning settled into something quieter, but not peaceful, the quiet of a held breath. The calm between what had just happened and what was coming. Emily stood at the kitchen window and watched the sheriff ride back down the road. And Wyatt watched her, and Clara watched both of them from her seat at the table. Eating a biscuit with the careful attention of a child who understands more than adults give her credit for. "He's going to come back," Emily said. Not Crane, she meant Whitmore. She turned from the window. Gerald doesn't send other people to do things and then accept what they report. He comes himself when it matters. "You think he'll come here?" Wyatt said. "I think when Crane wires him that the ledgers are gone and I'm not going to be quietly extracted." "Yes, he'll come," she paused. "He's never lost anything in his life that he didn't get back. He genuinely doesn't believe this is possible. He's going to be disappointed," Clara said from the table. With perfect seriousness, Emily looked at the girl. Something in her face softened in the way it always did with Clara, the involuntary softening of a person who has spent enough days keeping a child alive that the child has become part of how they breathe. "Yes," she said. The wire from Finch came 2 days later. Tom Garrett brought it himself, riding in from town mid-afternoon with the particular bearing of a man who had information and had been careful with it on the road. He handed the paper to Wyatt without a word. Wyatt read it. Then he handed it to Emily. She read it. Her face did not change while she was reading. But when she lowered the paper, her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the light. "Ledgers received intact. Entries reviewed. Concur with your assessment. Have contacted Aldrich Chicago directly. Response confirms relationship and disputes amounts. Federal Revenue Office Denver received your letter. Agent Thomas Reed assigned arrives Laramie within 5 days. Contract claim before Judge Alderman scheduled 10 days. Your presence and Miss Harper's testimony required. Advise immediately on Whitmore travel plans if known." Finch Federal Agent, Wyatt said. "Thomas Reed," Emily said. And something in her voice had changed to recognition. "I know that name. Whitmore mentioned him once. Reed has been investigating territorial fraud for 3 years. Whitmore called him a nuisance." She paused. "He said it the way men say things about people they're actually afraid of. Then Whitmore is about to become very afraid," Tom said. Wyatt looked at the wire, then at Emily. "We need to get you to Laramie in 10 days. "You and your testimony." "My testimony," she said. "And my memory. The ledgers confirm the numbers. But I'm the one who can explain what the numbers mean. How the accounts were structured, why each false entry was placed where it was. I spent 5 years inside that system. No one alive understands it better. Which is why Whitmore wants you back," Wyatt said. "Which is why Whitmore wants me silent," she corrected. Quietly, the word sat in the room. Wyatt looked at Tom. "How was the road? Anyone watching?" "Rider on the South Ridge when I came through town. Stayed parallel for about a mile, then turned off. Could be nothing. Could be Reeves," Wyatt said. "Could be," Tom agreed. Emily set the wire down on the table with the careful steadiness of someone refusing to let her hands shake. "They're watching the roads," she said. "If they can't get the ledgers and they can't extract me quietly. The next move is to prevent me from reaching Laramie." "That's an aggressive move," Wyatt said. Gerald Whitmore is facing a federal fraud investigation and the loss of everything he's built for 30 years. Her voice was level. Aggressive is what he has left. Clara had gone very quiet. She was sitting at the table, no longer eating, watching the adults with the particular alertness of a child who has survived difficult things by learning to read rooms accurately. "Are we going to be okay?" she asked. Wyatt looked at her. "We are," he said. "That's what you said before," Clara said. And then the man with the cold eyes showed up, and Miss Emily's face went tight. Emily made a sound that was almost a laugh surprised out of her. "She's right, my face went tight." "Your face is allowed to go tight," Wyatt told her. "Doesn't mean we're not going to be okay." He pulled out his chair and sat down across from Clara, and he looked at her directly, the way he'd learned she needed straight. No softening. "There are some people who want to take Miss Emily away from here," he said. "They have lawyers and money, and they've been planning this for a long time. We have something they don't have." "What?" Clara asked. "We're right," he said. "And in my experience, when you're right and you're patient and you don't make mistakes, right wins." Clara thought about this. "My mama says right doesn't always win," she said. "Your mama's not wrong," Wyatt said. "But right wins more often when someone shows up to fight for it." He paused. "And I intend to show up." Clara nodded slowly as if filing this away in a permanent place. The next 3 days moved in a rhythm that was both ordinary and charged the surface calm of a household functioning. Underneath it, the constant awareness of what was coming. Wyatt made repairs that needed making, tended the horses, managed what needed managing. Emily, whose wrist was improving and whose head was clear, began to spend time at the table each morning, writing not the accounting records but something else. A document she described as a formal witness statement. Organized and precise, every entry she could recall from memory laid out in chronological order with context and explanation. Wyatt watched her work sometimes, from across the room, and thought about the 4 months of letters that had brought him to a train platform in his good black coat. He had known she was intelligent. He had not fully understood. Until he watched her work, that intelligence in Emily Harper was not a quality, it was a weapon. Finely made and carefully kept, and she had been waiting 5 years for the right moment to use it. On the 4th day, the wire came from Robert Aldrich. Tom brought it again, and again he'd been watching his back on the road. Aldrich's wire was short and cold and furious in the way that only a man who has been cheated and has confirmed it can be furious, the rage of someone whose self-image includes never being fooled. Suddenly confronted with evidence that he had been fooled extensively and for years. "Amounts confirmed do not reconcile with my records. Discrepancy substantial. I am retaining counsel immediately. Please advise contact for federal agent. I will cooperate fully." Aldrich Emily read it and handed it to Wyatt and went to the window. He gave her a moment. "You all right?" he said. She stopped. "I spent 5 years being afraid he was too powerful. That no one would believe me, that the contract would hold, and the money would win, and I would just..." She pressed her good hand against the window frame. "Aldrich is one of the most respected businessmen in Chicago. When he walks into that federal office and says Gerald Whitmore defrauded him, it is no longer my word against a wealthy man's reputation." "No," Wyatt said. "It's not." She turned around. Her eyes were bright again. But different from before. Not the brightness of relief, but the brightness of someone who has been running for a very long time and has just spotted solid ground. "We're going to win," she said. "Not hope. Just a statement of fact being recognized for the first time as fact." "Yes," Wyatt said. "We are." Clara looked up from the corner where she'd been drawing in the dirt with a stick. "Told you," she said. On the 5th day, Gerald Whitmore arrived in Cutter's Creek. Wyatt found out the way you found out things in a small town, Mrs. Pryor at the Mercantile, saw the stage come in and recognized the man who stepped off it from the description Emily had given the week before. She sent her boy running to the ranch within the hour. Whitmore was 54, the boy reported breathlessly, relaying Mrs. Pryor's words. Heavy, gray-haired, wore a very good coat. Had two men with him that nobody had seen before and did not look like cowboys. Wyatt thanked the boy and sent him back with a nickel and a note for Mrs. Pryor. He turned to Emily. She had gone still in the particular way she went still when something she had been expecting finally arrived, not surprise, but the body's response to confirmed dread, the moment when the thing you've been dreading steps out of the abstract and becomes real and present, and in the same town as you. He came himself, she said. Yes, that means he's more worried than Crane reported. She looked at Wyatt. Or Crane reported exactly what happened, and Whitmore decided that a man who built what he built was not going to lose it to a bookkeeper and a Wyoming rancher. He underestimates the Wyoming rancher, Tom said, from his seat by the door. He underestimates the bookkeeper, Emily said. She sat down. She picked up her pen. She turned back to her witness statement and kept writing. And Wyatt looked at the straight line of her back and the focused set of her shoulders and thought that Gerald Whitmore had spent 5 years with this woman in his household and had somehow managed not to understand what she was. His mistake, a significant one. Whitmore came to the ranch the next morning. He came with Crane and Prescott the lawyer, and he came without the hired riders, which told Wyatt that he had made a calculation that he was arriving as a businessman with legal standing, not as a man with enforcers, because he had already decided this was going to be resolved in a courtroom, and he wanted his posture to be correct. Wyatt met them at the porch. Whitmore was exactly as described, heavy, silver-haired, carrying himself with the settled authority of a man who had rarely been told no. He looked at Wyatt the way a man looks at an obstacle he is about to be reasonable at until it moves. Mr. Cole, he said. His voice was smooth and deep and had clearly worked rooms for 30 years. I appreciate you seeing me. I think if the two of us could speak plainly, we might resolve this situation to everyone's benefit without the unpleasantness of a court proceeding. I'm listening, Wyatt said. Emily Harper is a young woman who made a poor decision out of. He paused. Selected his word, understandable frustration. I hold no grudge. The arrangement between us was always meant to be temporary. And I've perhaps not communicated that as clearly as I should have. He spread his hands in a gesture of practiced reasonableness. If she returns voluntarily, I'll withdraw the complaint. The contract is dissolved. She goes free, clear, no legal proceedings. Simple. And the ledgers, Wyatt said. Whitmore's expression didn't change. They're my property. I want them back. They're currently in the possession of a federal revenue agent named Thomas Reed, Wyatt said. They've been there since yesterday morning. The smoothness cracked. Just for a second was enough. The color shifted in Whitmore's face. Not much. But Wyatt had been watching for it, and he saw it. That's not. Whitmore stopped. Restarted. Those ledgers were stolen property. Those ledgers are evidence in a federal investigation, Wyatt said. Which you would know, because Agent Reed arrived in Laramie 3 days ago, and I imagine his office has already been in contact with yours. Crane put his hand on Whitmore's arm, a restraining gesture. Barely visible. Whitmore looked at Wyatt with eyes that had stopped being reasonable. Where is she? He said. Not a question. Miss Harper is not available, Wyatt said. She is in your house, and she is bound by a legal. She is a 27-year-old woman who walked away from an arrangement she signed under duress at 21, Wyatt said. And his voice had the same temperature it always had. Because he had decided when he came out to the porch that he was not going to give this man anything to read in his face. She walked away with documentation of 5 years of fraud that has now been reviewed by a federal agent, confirmed by one of your business partners, and is scheduled to be presented before Judge Alderman in Laramie in 4 days. Whatever you came here to resolve quietly, Mr. Whitmore, is no longer available to be resolved quietly. Whitmore looked at him for a long moment. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, he said. No, Wyatt said. But I know what you've gotten yourself into. Whitmore turned and walked back to his horse. Prescott lingered. He was younger than Whitmore, and his face had the look of a lawyer who was doing rapid calculations about the stability of his client's position. Mr. Cole," Prescott said quietly. "For what it's worth, I was not aware of the full nature of the accounting records when I took this case. I appreciate you saying so," Wyatt said. Prescott nodded and walked back to his horse. Crane was the last. He stood at the edge of the porch and looked at Wyatt with eyes that had given up on concealment. "You've made an enemy," Crane said. "He made himself an enemy," Wyatt said. 5 years ago, when he decided that a person was something you could own on paper, Crane left. Wyatt went inside. Emily was standing in the kitchen doorway. She had heard everything. The window had been cracked. And he had known she would listen and had been glad. Because this was her fight and she deserved to hear how it sounded when it was fought out loud on her behalf. Her face was complicated in a way he couldn't entirely parse: relief and something rawer than relief. Something that looked like a person finally, after a very long time, being allowed to put down something heavy. 4 days, she said. 4 days, he confirmed. Clara appeared from behind Emily, tucking herself under Emily's arm in the automatic way she'd developed over the past week. Emily's hand came down and settled on the girl's shoulder without thought, without looking the same automatic ease. "Did the bad man leave?" Clara asked. "For now," Wyatt said. "In a courtroom," Wyatt said, "where we'll be ready for him." That evening, for the first time since she'd arrived at the ranch, Emily sat on the porch with him after supper. Clara had gone to sleep in the room Wyatt had set up for her, exhausted in the way children get when sustained tension finally releases. The night was warm and still, and the stars over Wyoming were the particular density that only happened when the air was perfectly clear. They sat for a while without talking. Then Emily said, "Tell me something about this place." "Not the trouble. Just the place." He thought about it. "There's a ridge about a mile north," he said. "When the sun comes over it in the morning, in summer, it lights up the whole east pasture for about 20 minutes before it gets high enough to clear the hills. It's a very specific kind of light. I've never seen it anywhere else." She was quiet for a moment. "I'd like to see that," she said. "You will," he said. She turned her head and looked at him, and the complicated expression was back but different now. Lighter, something resolving in it. "You never doubted it," she said. "Not once, since you found me on that mountain. You just proceeded. Like the outcome was already established." "I didn't know the outcome," he said. "I just knew what I was going to do. Outcomes take care of themselves when you do the right things." "That's very Western of you," she said. "I'm a very Western person." She turned back to the stars. "Wyatt," she said quietly. "Yeah, thank you, not for finding me. Not for the lawyers and the wires and all of it." She paused. "For proceeding. For just going forward like I was worth going forward for." He looked out at the dark pasture and the distant ridge and the sky that had more stars in it than most people ever got to see. "You are," he said. "Worth going forward for." The night settled around them, and for the first time in as long as either of them could remember, there was no immediate threat pressing at the edges of the quiet, just the ranch and the stars, and 4 days between them and a courtroom where everything would be decided. And somewhere north of them, Tom Garrett slept with one eye open. And in Laramie, Garrett Finch was preparing the case of his career. And in a hotel room in Cutter's Creek, Gerald Whitmore sat with Crane and stared at a wall and understood, perhaps for the first time in 30 years, that the machinery he had built was running in reverse. The trap was closed. All that remained was the morning. They left for Laramie before sunrise. Wyatt had the wagon ready at 4 in the morning, horses watered and fed, the bed lined with blankets for Clara, a canteen filled and provisions packed for the road. Tom Garrett was already saddled and waiting in the yard when Wyatt came out. And he did not ask if Tom was coming because Tom had already decided, and Wyatt had learned not to argue with decisions Tom had already made. Emily came out of the house carrying her traveling bag over her good arm. The wrist, still wrapped but stronger now, the bruising at her temple faded to yellow at the edges. She had dressed carefully, not for comfort, for court. Her back was straight, and her face was settled in the way it got when she had made up her mind about something, and the making up was finished. Clara was half asleep against Emily's side, moving on instinct, trusting the hand that guided her to the wagon. "You ready?" Wyatt asked Emily. "I've been ready for 5 years," she said. He helped her up to the bench and then lifted Clara into the wagon bed, and the girl curled into the blankets without fully waking. They rolled out of the yard in the dark, Tom riding left flank with his eyes on the road behind them, and Wyatt keeping the horses at a pace that 8 miles without punishing them. Nobody spoke for the first hour. Then Clara said from the back, in the blurry voice of someone not entirely awake, "Are we going to win today?" "Yes," Emily said. "How do you know?" "Because we have the truth and we have the evidence, and we have Wyatt," Emily said. "That's 3 things. We only need 1. Clara seemed satisfied with this and went back to sleep. Tom came up alongside the wagon as the first gray light started opening the eastern sky. "Rider behind us," he said. "About a quarter mile." Staying back, Wyatt didn't turn around. "Since when?" "Since the fork at Brentley Creek." 20 minutes. Emily's hand tightened on the edge of the bench. "Reeves," Wyatt said, "my thought. Whitmore wants to know which road we take. Or he wants to know if we stop somewhere unexpected," Tom said. "If we try to hand something off before we reach Laramie." Wyatt considered for a moment. Then he said, "Let him follow. We have nothing left to hide and nowhere unexpected to stop. We're going to Laramie. Let him watch us do it." Tom dropped back to his flank position. Emily said nothing for a mile. "Then he's documenting our movements. Building a narrative that we're coordinating something." "Let him build it," Wyatt said. "Every step we take goes straight to a federal courthouse. There's nothing in that narrative that hurts us. Whitmore doesn't see it that way." "Whitmore," Wyatt said, "has spent 30 years in rooms where he controlled every variable. He doesn't know how to operate when the variables stop cooperating." He glanced at her. "You stopped cooperating. That's the thing he still hasn't processed." Emily looked at the road ahead. "He told me once," she said quietly, "that women like me, educated, capable, particular, were dangerous to ourselves. That we needed structure. That the contract wasn't his word. A kindness." She paused. "He believed that. I think he genuinely believed it. Does that change anything?" Wyatt asked. She thought about it honestly, the way she did everything completely, without the comfort of easy answers. "No," she said. "Believing something sincerely doesn't make it true. And it doesn't make 5 years of fraud any less criminal." They reached Laramie at mid-morning. Garrett Finch was waiting at the edge of town, which told Wyatt that Finch had someone watching the road, a detail that was both reassuring and a reminder of exactly how seriously the lawyer was taking this. Finch was a thin, precise man of 50 with wire-rimmed glasses and the demeanor of someone who was always slightly ahead of the conversation. He shook Wyatt's hand, then turned immediately to Emily. "Miss Harper," he said, "I've read your witness statement 3 times. I have questions," Emily said, "in the carriage. On the way to the courthouse. We have 90 minutes. He had a carriage waiting." Wyatt handed the wagon reins to Tom, helped Emily down, and they climbed in. For the next 90 minutes, while Laramie moved past the windows, Finch asked questions, and Emily answered them with the precision of someone who had spent 5 years preparing for exactly this conversation, without knowing it. Wyatt sat across from them and listened and understood, more fully than he had before, what Gerald Whitmore had been sitting across a dinner table from for 5 years. She was extraordinary, not in the dramatic sense, in the specific, detailed, relentless sense. She knew every entry, she knew the dates, the amounts, the fictional companies, the real accounts, the chain of movement from false invoice to private account. She knew it the way a person knows something they have turned over in their mind 10,000 times in the dark, and she delivered it now with a calm that was more devastating than any emotion could have been. Finch stopped writing at one point and simply looked at her. "You have a forensic memory," he said. "I have a bookkeeper's memory," she corrected. "Numbers stay. "This is going to be a short proceeding," Finch said. And he did not say it like a compliment, he said it like a fact. Clinical and certain. The courthouse in Laramie was a solid stone building that smelled of paper and wood oil and the particular mustiness of a place where important things had been decided for many years. Judge Alderman presided, a different Judge Alderman than Wyatt had expected. Not the one who had signed the recovery order 4 days ago. He said as much to Finch in the corridor. Finch's expression shifted fractionally. Judge Cornelius Alderman signed that recovery order. This is Judge Harold Alderman. Different man, different bench, he paused. Cornelius Alderman and Gerald Whitmore are members of the same Omaha Businessman's Club. I filed a recusal motion yesterday morning. Wyatt looked at him. You knew, he said. I suspected. I confirmed it the day the order arrived. Finch straightened his papers. Whitmore had a friendly judge. He no longer has one. The courtroom was not large. Benches on both sides, a high bench at the front, the smell of an institution that had seen enough of human nature to be unsurprised by any of it. Wyatt took a seat behind Emily and Finch at the left table and looked across the aisle. Whitmore was already seated. He looked different here than he had on the ranch porch, still heavy. Still silver-haired, still wearing the good coat, but something in the posture had changed. The settled authority was still there, but underneath it, if you were looking carefully, was the particular tension of a man who has received news he did not expect, and has not yet decided how to absorb it. Crane sat beside him. Prescott was not there. Wyatt filed that absence away and said nothing. Judge Harold Alderman entered, and the room stood and then sat. And the proceeding began. It was as Finch had predicted. Not long. Whitmore's new lawyer, a man named Carver, who had arrived from Denver the previous day, which told Wyatt that Prescott had withdrawn, opened with the contract. He was competent and organized, and presented the indefinite term clause with the confidence of someone who believes their document is their entire case. He cited the financial arrangement. He cited the ledgers as stolen property. He cited the complaint filed 3 weeks ago. Then Finch stood up. He did not begin with Emily's testimony. He began with Agent Thomas Reed. Reed was a compact man of 45 who testified with the flat, specific language of federal law enforcement, no drama. No embellishment. Simply the facts of what the ledgers contained as documented by a government investigator. $14,000 moved through fictional companies over 5 years. 3 identified victims. False invoices, private accounts. Wire fraud across state lines. Carver objected repeatedly. Alderman overruled him repeatedly. Then Finch called Robert Aldrich. Aldrich had come from Chicago himself, which Wyatt had not known. And the sight of him, 60 years old, immaculate, furious in the contained way of a very wealthy man who has been made to feel foolish, landing in the witness chair, clearly landed on Whitmore like a physical blow. Wyatt saw Whitmore's jaw tighten. He saw Crane lean in and say something. He saw Whitmore shake his head once sharply. Aldrich confirmed every entry that bore his name. He confirmed the discrepancies. He confirmed that he had never received the goods or services invoiced. He confirmed that he would be pursuing his own civil claim and had already communicated with Agent Reed's office. When Aldrich left the stand, Carver asked for a recess. Alderman gave him 15 minutes. In the corridor, Whitmore found Emily. He came around the corner fast, moving with the displaced energy of a man who has been sitting still while things happen to him and has reached his limit. Crane was behind him, and Wyatt stepped forward from the wall where he'd been standing, closing the distance between himself and Emily in 2 steps. Whitmore stopped. He looked at Wyatt, then at Emily. His face had the look of something crumbling from the inside, while the outside held its shape through force of habit. "This is not what you think it is," Whitmore said to Emily. His voice was lower here, stripped of the courtroom performance. "I protected you. When your father's estate collapsed, when you had nothing, I was the one who stepped in. I was the one who gave you a position and a future when no one else. You gave me a contract," Emily said. Her voice was completely steady, not protection, a contract. And then you used it to keep me when I wanted to leave. And read my private correspondence, and filed a legal complaint to stop me before I was even gone. She looked at him with the directness she'd carried since the mountain. You mistook owning something for caring for it. Those aren't the same thing. Whitmore's mouth tightened. Everything I did. Produced $14,000 in your private accounts, Emily said. We can discuss motivation or we can discuss the ledgers. I'd prefer the ledgers, because at least those are factual. Whitmore looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his face, not remorse, Wyatt thought, but the particular expression of a man seeing clearly, for perhaps the first time, that the person across from him was never what he believed her to be. That he had been wrong, fundamentally, about the nature of what he was dealing with. You were always too smart for your own good, Whitmore said. No, Emily said, I was always exactly smart enough. Crane touched Whitmore's arm. Gerald, the recess. Whitmore turned and walked back toward the courtroom. Wyatt stood beside Emily and watched him go. You all right, he said. Yes, she exhaled. Yes, I needed to say that, I know. She looked at him. Did it sound as clear out loud as it did in my head? Clearer, he said. She nodded once, pulled herself straight, and went back into the courtroom. The recess ended. Carver made one more attempt, argued that the ledgers were irrelevant to the contract claim. That the contract claim should be heard independently of the federal investigation. That Emily's departure constituted a breach regardless of what the ledgers contained. He was organized and persistent and working with what he had. Which was not enough. Alderman listened. Then Finch stood up and said 7 words that changed the shape of everything. Your Honor, I have one more witness. Carver frowned. No additional witnesses were listed. This witness arrived in Laramie this morning, Finch said. Her testimony is directly material to the contract claim and the circumstances under which Miss Harper signed it. Alderman looked at Carver. Objection? On what grounds? Carver said, more to himself than anyone. He looked at his papers, then at Whitmore. Whitmore's face had gone very still. Proceed, Alderman said. The woman who walked into the courtroom was 60 years old. Small, with gray hair pinned carefully, and the bearing of someone who has done difficult things and is prepared to do one more. Wyatt did not recognize her. He looked at Emily. Emily's face had gone white. That's Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, Emily said, barely above a whisper. She was my father's secretary. She witnessed the contract, Mrs. Hartwell took the stand. Finch asked her 3 questions. The first, had she been present when Emily Harper signed the contract with Gerald Whitmore in 1879? Yes. The second, had Emily Harper been given time to read the contract in full before signing? No. She had been handed the document and told to sign where indicated. That the details would be explained later, that her father's debts would be cleared by end of week if she signed that day. The third, had Gerald Whitmore, in Mrs. Hartwell's presence, described the arrangement as temporary? Yes, he had used the words, and here Mrs. Hartwell looked directly at Whitmore with the calm of someone who has been keeping a thing safe for a long time and has decided now is when it gets used. He had used the words 6 months to a year. Perhaps 2 at most, and then she'll be free to go. The room was very quiet. Wyatt looked at Whitmore. Whitmore was looking at Mrs. Hartwell with an expression that was beyond calculation. Now it was the expression of a man watching the specific, personal moment of his own undoing, the moment when the variable he forgot to account for walks into a room and sits down and tells the truth. He had not known she was coming. Neither had Emily. She was sitting at the table with her hands flat on its surface, and her face doing something private and overwhelming that she was not allowing to become visible, but which Wyatt, who had been watching her face for 10 days now, could read in the line of her jaw and the way she was holding her breath. Carver had no cross-examination. There was nothing to cross-examine. Alderman called a 30-minute recess and returned with a ruling that was 11 minutes long and which dismantled Gerald Whitmore's position so completely and methodically that by the end of it, Crane had put his pen down and was looking at the table with the expression of a man deciding how quickly he can associate himself with the losing side. The contract was void, signed under misrepresentation, with a verbal promise of limited duration that contradicted the written indefinite-term coercion by another name. The judge said, regardless of the financial legitimacy of the debt arrangement, Emily Harper had no obligations to Gerald Whitmore. Legal or otherwise, the theft complaint was dismissed. The recovery order, signed by a judge with an undisclosed conflict of interest, was vacated. The federal fraud investigation, Alderman noted, was a separate matter and would proceed under Agent Reed's authority regardless of today's civil outcome. Whitmore stood when Alderman left the bench. He did not look at Emily. He did not look at Wyatt. He walked out of the courtroom with Crane behind him and the particular gait of a man who is going to go somewhere private before he lets his face do what it wants to do. And Wyatt watched him go and felt nothing dramatic, not triumph, not satisfaction, just the clean, quiet sense of a thing being finished that needed to be finished. Finch was shaking Emily's hand when Wyatt turned back. "Mrs. Hartwell," Emily said. Her voice had recovered its composure, but it was thin at the edges. "How did you find her?" Finch said. He looked at Wyatt. Wyatt shook his head. "Not me." They both looked at Mrs. Hartwell, who was collecting her gloves from the witness chair, with the unhurried precision of someone who has completed what they came to do. "I've been waiting 6 years," Mrs. Hartwell said, without looking up. "I left Whitmore's employ in 1880. What I saw in that office when that girl signed that paper." She looked at Emily now. "Directly. I should have spoken sooner. I told myself it wasn't my business and I was a coward about it." She paused. "When I read in the Omaha paper that Whitmore had filed a complaint against a former employee over ledgers, and I knew what those ledgers contained. Because I'd watched those accounts for a year before I left, I wrote to the territorial court in Laramie and asked who the presiding lawyer was." She looked at Finch. "He found me after that." Emily crossed the distance between them and took Mrs. Hartwell's hands in both of hers, wrist wrap and all, and held them. She didn't say anything for a moment. "Thank you," she said finally. Simple and complete. Mrs. Hartwell pressed her hands once and let go. "Go have a life, child. That's thanks enough." Clara was outside on the courthouse steps with Tom Garrett, who had sat through the morning in the corridor with the specific patience of a man who knew his role today was to keep one small girl occupied and safe, which he had done by teaching her 3 card games and letting her win 2 of them. She saw Emily coming through the doors and launched herself off the step. Emily caught her with her good arm, pulling her in hard, and Clara wrapped both arms around Emily's waist and held on the way she'd held on in the mountain dark. With everything she had. Clara said into Emily's shoulder. "We won," Emily said. Clara pulled back and looked at her with enormous eyes. "All of it?" Clara looked at Wyatt, who had come out behind Emily. "You said right wins," she told him, with the gravity of someone confirming a thesis. "I did say that," he agreed. "You were right, I was," he said. "It does happen occasionally." Clara almost smiled, then got serious again. "What happens now?" Emily and Wyatt looked at each other over the girl's head. It was the first time the question had been asked so directly, by someone who needed an actual answer rather than a direction to look away from it. What happened now was not a small question. It covered Emily's legal freedom, her future, the contract she and Wyatt had originally entered into through the correspondence agency, and the presence of a small girl on a ranch in Wyoming whose mother was in Junction, working at a boarding house, waiting to save enough money to send for her. Now Emily said carefully, "We figure together?" Clara asked. Emily looked at Wyatt again. There it was, the question that had been building since a mountain dark, since an empty train platform, since 4 months of letters, written by two people who had been honest with each other across a distance and discovered something real before they'd ever been in the same room. Wyatt looked at Emily Harper, at the woman who had crossed half a continent to keep a promise, who had held a scared child alive for 5 days with nothing but will and warmth, who had sat in a courtroom 2 hours ago and dismantled a powerful man's position with 5 years of careful memory and not one tremor in her voice. Together, he said. He said it the way a man says something he has already decided, simply confirming it out loud for the benefit of the people who needed to hear it. Emily's chin moved just slightly, just the smallest acknowledgement of something landing where it was supposed to land. Together, she agreed. The ride back to Cutter's Creek was quieter than the ride out, not the quiet of held breath, but the different quiet of people who have been through something together and don't need to fill the space it left behind. Clara sat between Emily and Wyatt on the wagon bench on the way home, which had not been the arrangement on the way out. And nobody mentioned the change because it didn't require mentioning. Tom rode alongside and did not say much, which was his particular way of expressing that he was satisfied with how things had gone. About an hour out of Laramie, Emily said, "I need to write to Clara's mother." "I know," Wyatt said. "She needs to know Clara is safe, and she needs to know," Emily paused. "She needs to know that Clara has a place here. A real one. For as long as it takes." "For as long as it takes," Wyatt agreed. Clara was looking at the road ahead, pretending very hard not to be listening, which was transparent to everyone. "Clara," Emily said. Clara said. "We're going to write to your mama." Clara's hands tightened slightly in her lap. "What if she wants me to go back to Junction?" "Then we'll talk to her together," Emily said. "And we'll figure out what's best for you." "Not best for you." "What if what's best for me is staying here?" Clara asked. Very quietly, the wagon moved over the road. A hawk crossed the sky ahead of them, riding something invisible, barely moving its wings. "Then we make that case," Wyatt said, respectfully. "And honestly, and with your mama's feelings in the picture. But we make it." Clara looked at him. "You're good at making cases," she said. "I've noticed. I've had a good week for it," he said. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from Junction. It was 2 pages in careful handwriting from a woman named May Sutton, who wrote with the particular grammar of someone who hadn't been educated beyond 14, but who chose every word with care. She wrote about the boarding house and the man she'd been with, who was gone now. She wrote about Junction and how she'd been thinking about Wyoming since Clara's last letter, the one Clara had composed with Emily's help. She wrote about fear, about how afraid she'd been that Clara hated her for putting her on that wagon, and how Clara's letter had said something she needed to hear, which was that the wagon had taken her somewhere she was supposed to be. At the end she wrote, "I can't come yet. I still don't have enough saved. But I think maybe I'm going to try to come to Wyoming when I do. If there's room. If that's not too much to ask of people who don't owe me anything." Emily read it at the kitchen table, then handed it to Wyatt. He read it. Then he looked at Clara, who was in the yard visible through the window, feeding scraps to the chickens with the focus of someone who had recently been assigned a responsibility and was taking it seriously. "There's room," he looked at him. "You're sure? This ranch has a good house and a spare room and more land than one man can work sensibly," he said. "And it could use more people in it who matter." He paused. "Yes, I'm sure." Emily picked up her pen and started writing May Sutton's reply. One morning 6 weeks after Laramie, Wyatt was up before dawn, habit and cattle and the particular instinct of a rancher whose mornings ran on biology rather than intention. He came out of the house into the early half-dark, stood on the porch with his coffee. He heard the door behind him. Emily came out, which was unusual. She was not. She had established clearly a before-dawn person. She had a blanket around her shoulders and her hair down, and the look of someone who had woken up and decided not to fight it. She stood beside him on the porch. "You're going to show me the ridge," she said. He looked east. The first light was beginning. That specific. particular Wyoming light had described to her on a different porch a lifetime ago. The one that came over the North Ridge in summer and lit the east pasture for 20 minutes. Yeah, he said, I am. They stood there together and watched it come. It was exactly what he'd described. The light moved across the grass like something intentional. Something that knew where it was going and had always known. And it turned the whole pasture the color of something that didn't have a precise name, gold. But warmer, amber without the heaviness, the specific shade of a summer morning that had been doing this since before either of them existed and would keep doing it long after. Emily did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, "You were right. About which part?" "All of it." She pulled the blanket tighter. "The light. The ranch, right winning eventually." She paused. "You." He looked at her. She was looking at the pasture. But she was smiling, the real one, the one that showed up when she wasn't managing herself. The one he had been watching arrive in stages since a mountain night when he'd built a fire and talked to a barely conscious woman because the voice mattered. "Emily," he said. She turned. He had been thinking about how to say what he was about to say for a while, not the words specifically. Because he didn't think in words when it came to things that mattered. But the shape of it, the intention of it, whether the timing was right and whether he was sure. He was sure. "I wrote to the agency in Denver," he said. "When this started, told them the arrangement had become complicated, and I didn't know if it would resolve the way we'd originally planned." She looked at him steadily. "When did you do that?" "The morning after I found you on the mountain." He held her gaze. "I told them I didn't know what the arrangement would become. I told them whatever it became, I intended to see it through." "You wrote that," she said. "Before you knew any of it. Before Whitmore, before the ledgers. Before the court. Yes, just because you'd found me. Just because of who you were when I found you," he said. "Who you kept being through all of it." Emily looked at him for a long moment, reading him the way she read everything. Completely, without the comfort of easy answers. "Wyatt Cole," she said. "Yeah. Are you asking me something?" "I'm asking if you want to stay," he said. "Not because of the arrangement. Not because of what you signed or what you came out here for or what it solves. Just if you want to stay here. This ranch." He paused. "With me." The east pasture held its color for another breath of light. And the ridge did what it always did. And Wyoming sat around them, large and indifferent and absolutely beautiful, in the way of things that don't require your opinion of them. "Yes," Emily said. "Simple. Complete. The word of a woman who has crossed mountains and courtrooms and 5 years of careful survival to arrive at the place she was supposed to arrive at. And who knows, when she gets there, that it's real." He put his arm around her, and she leaned into his side. And they stood on the porch of the ranch that was no longer just his and watched the light do what it had always done. Filling the world with something that had no precise name but that both of them, on that particular morning, understood completely. Inside, Clara was still sleeping. Outside, the ranch was waking, the horses moving in the pasture. The chickens beginning their commentary, the creek running somewhere past the willows with the sound of water that has no memory of difficulty and no awareness of arrival. Only the continuous, uninterrupted fact of its own going. Wyatt Cole had stood on a train platform 8 weeks ago, with a letter in his hand and a heart full of something he hadn't yet learned to call hope. He had gone into the mountains after a woman he barely knew, because he believed she was worth going after, not because the arrangement demanded it. Not because pride demanded it, but because 4 months of honest letters had told him something true about who Emily Harper was. And he was not a man who walked away from true things. He had found her holding on. He had brought her home. And home, it turned out, was not the place he had built alone over 11 Wyoming years, the solid walls. The good window, the second chair he had added to the table before she arrived. Home was what happened in it. A woman with a bookkeeper's memory and an undefeated spine. A small girl who fed the chickens every morning now, with the gravity of someone entrusted with something important. The sound of voices in rooms that had been silent. The way Emily laughed when something surprised her. Which was a real laugh, the kind that meant she hadn't seen it coming. The way Clara argued about bedtime with the focused persistence of a natural negotiator who was going to be formidable at 30 and was already impressive at 8. The second chair at the kitchen table was no longer empty. It had never really been about the chair. It had been about the person who would sit in it, the specific, irreplaceable, extraordinary person who had crossed half a continent in a hired wagon on a muddy mountain road to keep a promise to a man she had never met. Because she had read his letters and decided he was worth the crossing. She had been right about him. He had been right about her. And in Cutter's Creek, Wyoming, in the summer of 1886, that was enough. That was everything.